Hi, my name is Ken Fickler. I'm the founder and CEO of Gaze, and today I want to talk about the difference between DUI, DWI, OVI, OWI, all pretty similar terms, but let's start with some definitions. So I'm going to run through a couple different definitions here and then we can talk about what these all mean. So DUI is driving under the influence. DUII is driving under the influence of intoxicants. DUID, driving under the influence of drugs. DUIICS, driving under the influence of intoxicants, controlled substances. DWI is driving while intoxicated. OVI, operating a vehicle while intoxicated, and that's only valid in Ohio. OMVI, operating a motor vehicle while impaired. OWI, operating while intoxicated, and that's in Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, and Indiana only. OUI, operating under the influence of intoxicating liquor. DWAI, driving while ability impaired. And ADWI, aggravated driving while intoxicated. So each of these terms are related to a legal charge of driving while impaired. And sort of the subtle differences between state are pretty minor, but these are for alcohol, drugs, and then there's some changes for severity of the impairment that is being experienced. So in a sense, they all mean pretty similar things, and that is that you're in legal trouble for having operated a vehicle while impaired from some substance. And each state sets their own laws on this, and that's why we have these different terms, but they have almost the same meaning. And each state, with the exception of Utah, has the same universally adopted 0.08 blood alcohol concentration limit. In Utah, the limit is 0.05 BAC, so quite a bit lower. And that's really important for those that live in Utah or maybe driving through Utah. Some other states are also considering lowering their limits, but have not yet done so as of February of 24. So what's the definition of driving or operating a vehicle? And this is really important for those that are facing a DUI-related charge. This is defined as being in actual physical control of the vehicle. And that's the reason you can get a DUI or any like kind charge when you're not actively driving. So if you're parked, you're still in physical control of the vehicle and you can be given a DUI or a similar charge if you're impaired. So courts typically consider a few factors in determining whether you're in actual physical control of the vehicle, and those include whether or not the keys were in the ignition, or if the key fob was in the possession of the person. So that is, do you have the ability to start the car in that moment? And then next, was the engine running or the car activated? So you need to consider whether or not the vehicle has the ability to be put into motion, and courts consider that. Was the vehicle operable? So is the vehicle something that can move under its own power if directed to by the driver? And then was the person sitting in the driver's seat or in another seat? And so that'll determine whether or not they have the ability to operate the vehicle, and that's a very important factor. And that really brings up this question, is it allowable to sleep it off in your car? And that's really risky, and DUIs are commonly issued to people for doing this. The rationale behind that is, was the person actually in physical control of the vehicle, and therefore do they pose a threat to highway safety? So in order for the officer to know with certainty that the person was not in control of the vehicle, they need to not be in the driver's seat, the engine should not be running, and they should not be in a driving situation where they had to drive to get there. So for example, sleeping it off on the side of a road is going to result in a DUI because you had to drive to get there. However, if you're sleeping it off in the parking lot of a bar, you may not be given a DUI as long as you're not in the driver's seat and as long as the vehicle is not running. Obviously, this causes some challenges for cold climates, but it's always safer to sleep it off in a passenger seat with the vehicle running and then plead your case to a judge if you do get a charge than it is to risk freezing to death or driving while impaired. So why do commercial drivers have a different blood alcohol concentration limit? And that is because they are operators that are charged with driving large and heavy loads or large numbers of passengers. Commercial driver's licenses enable their holders to operate vehicles that weigh more than 16,001 pounds or carry more than 15 passengers. And so therefore there's a lot of additional responsibility that's placed on CDL holders. So they are limited to a 0.04 blood alcohol concentration limit. And so that's half what it is for normal driver's licenses. This limitation is for CDL drivers at all times, not just when they're operating a commercial vehicle. So for many people, a .04 BAC is achievable after anything greater than 1 drink. So if you have a CDL, be extremely careful and cautious and make plans to get a sober ride if you've been drinking at all. So what are the penalties for being convicted of a DUI, DWI, OVI, or OWI? The penalties vary by state, and they're usually dependent on a number of factors. And those include how many impaired driving convictions you may have in your past, how impaired you were at the time of arrest, so more impairment can often result in greater penalties, and whether or not any property damage or injuries occurred as a result of your driving while impaired. Much more severe penalties often result if you have any of those additional issues, so just don't do it. Just don't drive while impaired. Some of the common penalties for impaired driving convictions include treatment for alcohol and drug addiction, suspension or revocation of your driver's license. If you have a CDL, often includes job loss, and then you have to go through a work re-entry process, which can be very onerous. You can be required to install an ignition interlock breath alcohol device in your vehicle, restrictions on when and where you're allowed to drive, restrictions on visiting bars in particular, probation, fines, and of course, jail. So what do you do if you're too impaired to drive but you need to get somewhere? Really, that comes down to you needing to make prior plans and make sure that you're not in a position where you have to operate a vehicle while impaired. Make decisions about how many drinks you'll consume in a night. Stick to that. Don't be tempted to drink more than you had planned on, particularly if you're going to be charged with driving people. And then if you're going to be consuming alcohol or drugs in excess to what you can safely drive on, make plans for a sober ride. If you've had too much to drink and don't have another ride, obviously ask somebody or call a rideshare, Uber, Lyft, or a taxi. Just whatever you do, just don't drive while impaired. And impaired driving charges are, of course, extremely expensive. The average cost in the United States is over $10,000 to deal with a DUI or related charge, not to mention the risk that you're, of course, putting your life and importantly, the lives of others in if you drive while impaired. So GAZE is a tool that looks for impairment from cannabis, alcohol, and other drugs, and it's being leveraged by certain law enforcement departments and many businesses today. It's a rapid screening device that looks for impairment using eye movement indicators, using the same test that law enforcement drug recognition expert police officers currently use. GAZE can be used to ensure that you are safe to drive before leaving. So if a bar happens to have GAZE, for example, you could go through a test to make sure you're safe and sober to drive. Employers, law enforcement, and venues similar can all use GAZE to ensure that safe driving laws are being followed, even for non-alcohol substances. And so that's a really important factor in our product. We want to make sure that people are safe to drive no matter what they've consumed. And in an age where cannabis is legal in many places, it's really important that people know their limits. So thank you so much for the time today. Hope you found some value in this, and stay safe out there.